Welcome to Expedition Self on OMTimes Radio with lifelong learner, entrepreneur, and creator of the worlds of Expedition Self, Sam Parrotto. Sam shares 4 decades of studying, guiding, and teaching how to go inside so we can build an incredibly powerful, dynamic, and validating relationship with the self. Expedition Self is laced with stellar, unexpected insights about what it means to be human. Listen now and ignite your self-development process with Sam Parrotto.
Well, hello. You have arrived. I am here. I'm Sam Parrotto, and I'm the host of this weekly show on Expedition Self, where we learn about how to go inside the self. You know, on the promo when it says ignite your self-development process, I so believe in this idea of a focused, intentional process of transformation. And in this week's show, I'm going to have the opportunity to really define what it means to be in relationship. And this is a really cool thing for me because I know when I say in relationship that most people think I'm just forgetting the A, that I'm supposed to be saying in a relationship, but I'm not. It's intentional on my part. So I'm going to be explaining this very distinctive difference and why it matters in your own self-development as we talk about how we connect to all things today. So the name of our show is How Do You Connect? Well, I'm so very pleased you're here because I know that it means that you are serious about your own self-development, that your movement, your transformation, you're finding more freedom and power as a human being, and you're healing and being someone who brings that kind of psychological and heart-driven integrity to your life, that's who you are. I know it's not an easy path to bring that kind of not just squishy stuff, but disciplined thinking and commitment to being willing to feel the chaos and pressure of an everyday life, especially when there's so much around us that keeps pushing on us to become edgy, right, and harsh, and start looking through the lens of right and wrong and good and bad only. So, bravo, clap to you for being one who does this. You know, I don't always stop and say, acknowledge that you're doing it too, right along with me. You know, when we work on ourselves, we're healing everyone. We're helping to get to the place where we have more room for others, where we can listen without getting all polarized and, feel like we're in an opposite camp and hot under the collar, right, as I blow my collar, and where we actually become the change agents that we're wishing for, right, ourselves. We become them. But we engage in that change work not to fix others, not because we're trying to make ourselves feel good about how we're helping everybody else, but because of our own commitment to evolve. It's just such a big deal because we need everyone on this bandwagon. And I think it's that time in history. If you are listening to my shows every week, I'm talking about this more and more, where we need to make that big jump forward as a collective humanity. Yeah, I really believe this. And I wanted to send prayers and inspiration and wisdom to every person involved in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict right now. It's going on. So I found a great post this morning about, this is just a little aside, about all the reasons why Russia wants to take over the Ukraine. There were like 25 of them. And I do feel like the more we understand anything, that the more we can shape the collective unconscious around it. So if you're interested in that list, just write me at hello@expeditionself.com and I'll forward it on over to you so you have it as well. I want to share with you what had me want to talk about this idea of connecting for the show today, above and beyond the fact that I know everybody always thinks I'm leaving out the A in relationship. It was my mom's birthday this weekend, and she loves marine life and fish. So, being a Pisces, so we made our way to the Baltimore Aquarium. And we signed up for the Before It Opens tour, which meant that we get to be a part of a small group. It gets a behind the scenes tour of the entire aquarium before the crowds come in. It was this chilly morning, brr, brr, we had hats and gloves on, walked a ways to get to the employee door. I was thinking in my head, oh, I've done things like this before, to go to a museum or something that was designed to help us learn about the world we live in. So we made our way to the first level and gathered around the guide. Her name was Brianna. And she said, I'd like to take a moment just to ask you all a question. And of course, being the facilitator at heart that I am, I thought, ooh, she's going to do community stuff here. Yeah, that's interesting. But what I wasn't expecting was the way the question was posed. And I was really struck by how perfect it was, because what she said was, how are you connected to water? Now, think about that question. How are you connected to water? She didn't ask, how do you feel about water? Or what do you think about water? Or even, what do you know about water? No, she asked, how are you connected to water? So as she went around, I said, oh, I'm connected to it through swimming in the Colorado River every day as I grew up. Another guy said, I'm a Pisces. And someone else said, I needed to live. And someone else described growing up on Lake George. And I think somebody else said, oh, I just like it. I've got to tell you, there was this instantaneous oneness that happened for all of us. Having a connection to water is generally not controversial. Everyone has one. And it was a question that, because of the way it was worded, it had us think about it while also putting ourselves in it. It was like, how are you connected to water? So it took this idea of water and it put us with it. We didn't just think about some body of water or the role of water in our lives. We thought about how water had something to do with us. And I was so excited through the rest of the tour, because then I saw the question a number of times throughout the day, like on the walls. So clearly they had gotten together and decided this was the way to help people get more related to the aquarium and their experience when they're there. I was blown away by what I feel was this innate brilliance of that, because we humans often like to distance ourselves by staying in our heads and not bringing our whole self of what's going on inside, to the things that we're doing. The people that we got to learn from on that day, we went to the engineering area where they process the 2.5 million gallons of water a day to take care of all their animals. We got to watch a dolphin training session, and Bo made eyes at my mom. And we were able to walk right in the shark tank and have it be quiet and let the sharks swim beneath our feet. And I have to say that the people who care for those animals, they know their connection to the water is incredibly, incredibly intimate. So as an aside, before we dive in a little further, I'd encourage anyone who hasn't visited that aquarium to make their way there. It's in Baltimore. It's an incredible experience. So you are welcome to think about this question, how are you connected to water? And that's the point. How are you connected? That's what today's show is about, because it helps us to keep putting ourselves in, to keep seeing ourselves as part of the problem and the solution, to recognize that we are always connected, no matter how far away we are from the circumstances or the situation or element, that's part of life. Okay, this is my point in the show every time. I want to remind everyone this is a call-in show. That means you pick your phone up and you dial 202-570-7057. And the first thing you can call in and talk about is, how are you connected to water? Feel free. I'd love to hear it. I think sometimes those of you who listen think you have to have something profound to talk about when you call in, or or even you're supposed to directly connect to what I'm saying, but you don't. I'm really interested in whatever shows up for you during the show, and I trust your psyche and I trust your intuition that it's going to be relevant for you or it wouldn't have shown up. So I hope to hear from you today at 202-570-7057. This question, how are you connected? It's such a perfect question because it's what I'm really asking when I say, how are you in relationship with that thing? Think of it like this: a thread, a rope, a twine between you and something else, like a tree or the sun or your steering wheel or the weather or your favorite food. When you actually notice that you are in fact related, 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 you have some association to it. There's some way in which you can notice that and you. This is a little complex to describe, but I think for most of us, we live out of a sense of separation, that we are in some way disconnected from that which is outside of our skin or our own bodies. We're defined by the actual tangible acts of doing and acting. And maybe if we're a bit more inward focused, we might notice we have emotion and feeling, and that has a universal connection. Well, when I talk about being, I'm trying to draw your mind away from that plane of awareness and towards your inner wholeness, whoosh, where you're in relationship with your whole self. Thoughts are just a small part. Your physical experience, your emotional experience, your spiritual experience, and ultimately the way in which you occupy yourself, embody yourself as a human being who is moving in and through your life. So I want to say this again for you, that most of us are living out of an idea that each part of life is somehow separated from the other, that the right hand is mostly acting separately or discreetly from the left. We focus on action and what's tangible, which means that one action is occurring and it starts and it stops. So the next action or the next day or the next hour is in some way not related from the one before it. Think of it like if we live in one city, that's where we are. And that's affiliated with the city that's not affiliated with the city that's across the country from us, or the country that's across the world from us. You see, this sense of separation is embedded very deep. It means that when we walk down a street, we're inside of our own skin. And that means we don't have to be thoughtful about how what's happening across the street has something to do with us. So a question like, how are you connected with something? Or how are you in relationship with that? It's like a shortcut into triggering your mind, like bloop, your mind to drop into a place where we make the assumption that you actually are connected. Bloop. That's the drop. That's the little trigger. That there is some form of relationship happening. And here's the kicker, that it's happening even if you're not aware of it. As an aside, we feel alone in this world. Isolation is such a very common thing. And we often take actions because we don't realize that when we yell at that driver, that we're somehow related or connected to them, that it's not happening in some unlinked bubble. How are you connected with something? How are you in relationship with it? Gosh, it gives you such an open playground to explore what this actually means. And it helps you learn about yourself, where you feel connected and where you don't, where you feel separate and where you feel aligned or one with things. And this is how you get more power in your life. Because if you don't see your connection or your relationship to it, well, then you don't have any leverage to do anything with it because you're just too far away. Think about trying to pick up that rope, the end of the rope, but it's 20 feet out of reach. So when we're working with this idea of how do I connect, we have to start with recognizing that we have a connection with all things. But it's not really how we think. Remember, we're so tangible and action and doing oriented, and a lot of times disassociated from even parts of ourselves and moments in our own life. To begin to think about you, the self, your head, your heart, your body, your thoughts, your reactions, your sense of belonging, and your humanness, as if you are connected to all things. And then to take the time to notice what that connection is. How are you in relationship with it? It catapults you. It totally disrupts that concrete way that you inadvertently relate to life from. And it puts you in the territory, like squarely in the territory of oneness with all things, operating as a human being and recognizing that there is no thing on earth that you aren't connected with. And this means that you have the power to create anything or change anything. It means you take seriously your responsibility for being an essential member of the interconnectedness of all things. And I think that's a really heady concept, this idea that I am connected to all things. So, okay, when we come back from break, we're going to go to the next level of this whole conversation about how am I connected and in relationship.
A conscious lifestyle for a mindful life. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
All right, we are back on Expedition Self. I'm Sam Parrotto, and we're talking today about the power of asking the question, what am I connected? How am I connected to something? And how am I in relationship with it? And the idea of this amazing way to think about life is that it helps you drop a level down into the place that isn't so focused on what it looks like is black and white and real, and into the place where we're related to all things. So it reminds me of this movie I watched years ago. It was called Powder, and it was about a boy who was struck by lightning as a baby. And he became this conduit of feelings where he could connect someone to something else and they would feel it. So there's this scene where kind of a jerky hunter, and I'm not saying all hunters are jerky, but this one was. It was unfeeling and flip and kind of cocky. And so Powder took the hunter's hand, and then he touched the deer that he had just shot so that the hunter could feel what that deer was going through. And the hunter scrambled away, couldn't handle it. He was completely overcome by having a direct connection to what the deer experienced as he was on the receiving end of that hunter's rifle. And I did a show about having a compassionate heart, and noticing how we're connected is a part of having that kind of compassionate heart, right? You can see this because when you feel like you and something else are bonded or linked, then what you do with that other thing is in some way affecting you too. I was in a conversation yesterday where someone said, I'm done. I'm not touching anymore. I'm not going to be in a relationship with that person. I don't want to deal with this situation anymore. I'm not helping. And, my response was, you're probably not done because you'd be affected in a way that you wouldn't like it. You just may not see it for right now. We definitely pay for disconnects, even the ones we don't recognize as disconnects. And of course, that makes them all the more difficult because we can be complaining about our lives or not liking how our lives are going or feeling like something happened that we felt like shouldn't have happened in some way. And we may not realize that some of that disconnect was behind why it went the way it did, that we didn't even realize we weren't in relationship or recognizing that connection. So I created just a list of some questions for you to ponder as we talk about this to make it a little more real for you. I'll read them. I'm going to try to read them slow. I get told sometimes I move too fast. So, how are you connected with the food you eat? And how are you connected with cooking? How are you connected with children? How are you connected with hard work, the sweaty kind? How are you connected with music? How are you connected to the idea of fun or joy or delight? How are you connected with money? How are you connected with your sidewalk or the tree in your front yard or the stoplight at the center of town or the homeless person that sits outside of the local drugstore? It's anything, right? The idea that you are in connection with or related to or in relationship with anything. As you think about the answer to some of those questions, you'll definitely have your own way of describing this. It'll be like when Brianna asked everyone how they were connected to water. The issue, though, is taking the time to really think about it, to really notice it, to delve into it. So one of the first things I look at when I'm thinking about how am I in relationship with something is I think about, do I spend time thinking about it or working on it or making it better or trying to understand it or trying to build more relationship with it? That's the first stop along the way here. Are you in relationship with it? I am saying that when you are in relationship with something, it's probably somewhat conscious. It may be one that you're trying to make more conscious. And it means that you're paying some level of attention to it. You are trying to build on it or grow it or expand it, right? You're trying to cuddle up with it. You maybe even getting more, intimate with it in the way that you think and feel. It's gonna be something that draws your interest. And if you would say, no, I'm not in relationship with it, I don't spend time here at all, well, that's worth noting. Because your recognition of the things you're not in relationship with at all is a hugely important learning about yourself. because then you get to register what that looks and feels like when you're not in relationship with something. It's kind of like in art where they, talk about that the spaces outside of the lines, the white space or the dark spaces, are actually as important as the line itself. So when I think about being in relationship, there's as much juice to squeeze out of noticing the places you think you're not in relationship as the ones where you actually clearly have an interest. Yeah, I generally am not in relationship with political stuff. I don't notice it. I don't pay attention to it. I will most of the time turn the other direction away from it. But that brings me to the next point I want to make. See, I actually am in relationship with that political stuff. I obviously have a connection. So given what I just said, what would you say it is? How would you describe my relationship with political stuff if I say I'm not in relationship with it? Apathetic, maybe? Disinterested? Resistant? Resentful? Does it make sense that by noticing that I don't feel connected to the political scene, I also get to notice that I am in relationship with it in some way? It's not a strong or positive one, but rather one of avoidance or denial or resentment or Chris, our producer, he just wrote me, he said, disdain and disgust. See, when we're thinking about what we're connected to or how we're in relationship with something, you're going to be challenged to add some definition and description and nuance and color and depth to the thing you're pondering. So it's not just I'm connected to it or I'm not connected to it. When you're working on your self-development process and you're developing a relationship with yourself, saying things are fine or good or in or yes or no, it really doesn't do you justice. So every time you can practice finding specific, explicit words that really resonate deeply in your belly, you're giving yourself a new language to be with you, to be in that relationship with you. You're drawing yourself into being interested, not in the thing necessarily, but the nature of how you interweave with it. So I'm hoping this is making sense. It's like when we start looking at life through how am I in relationship, we don't actually care about the thing. Exactly, right? Because what we care about is looking about the qualitative element, the way in which we relate with it, and the way in which it's landing in our own psyches. So the idea of politics is wrapped up in how I actually relate to it. And that, my friends, is what's fascinating. See, this kind of awareness, it's like having more consciousness. And it is indicative of our own evolving process. And being more evolved, it means that you attend to things in a very deep and focused way. By noticing that you're viscerally in or out of relationship with something, right? Viscerally, you know what that means? It's like you feel the muscle in your leg and you feel the bone in your hip and you feel your elbow. That's visceral, right? Your tummy registers it. So it's acute, and it's a specific way we stay self-aware. So by noticing the nature of this relationship, the distance between you and that thing, whatever you're filling the blank in with, the sense of attachment you have to it, and the degree of avoidance. So I look at all relationship of everything and anything, and even waking up in the morning. How am I in relationship with waking up? How am I in relationship with water when I drink it? Right? this distance lens. What's the distance in my relationship? So my relationship with politics is that I'm very much detached from it. I prefer to be an outlier, to avoid knowing the intricacies of it. Okay, so I'm hoping this is kind of building on itself. And when you say, how am I related to this? And you start thinking about, I'm going to look at how I'm related. I'm going to look at it through this lens of how much distance is there between where I am and where I'm not, right? You would first notice this distance and space and attachment and aloofness. So just to help you get a little further with this, picture yourself standing in the middle of this playground and begin to slowly turn, in a circle, 1 inch at a time, 30 seconds at a time. And just visualize it with me. Just picture yourself beginning to stand in the middle of this playground. So you begin this 360-degree rotation while you're simultaneously paying attention to what you're looking at and where you're standing and what's happening to you as you stand there. So when you look at something, it will register for you. How close does it feel? How familiar does it feel? Do your eyes linger on it? What shows up in your awareness? So this question of how am I connected to it and the question of how am I in relationship with that thing? How am I in relationship with that thing? Now, I'm saying this 50 times today because I really, really want you to start, wake up tomorrow morning and say, I'm going to look at life through how I'm in relationship with it. I think it will blow your mind. You will start to notice how much you're not in it. You'll start to notice how much you avoid. You'll notice these qualitative elements of living in your skin, that you like something and that it draws you and it feels interesting, and then those things that don't. I went for years having a distant relationship with music. And it was so fascinating because I would turn it on for very specific moments, like when I was cleaning my house or when it was sunny out and I would open the windows. But I wouldn't drive with it. And for a little while, I only wanted to listen to female singers. If I were to describe my distance with music at that time, I'd say I had very tight management on it. I didn't really want it to make me feel anything that was outside of the lines that I had drawn for it. And I didn't seek it out, and nor did I really care who was performing for the most part, right? It was this background. And when I think back on it, it's like, wow, that was interesting. I was limiting and containing the impact that the music would have on me. Now, I will say I'm much more in relationship with it now. When I went through my midlife transition over the last 10 years, it was music and reading and dancing and doing art and getting out of the lines, right? And allowing so much more that became the most important thing to me. And as I was going through it, I wondered, because, all of a sudden my life got it was colorful again, and I wondered, why did I distance myself so much to the music in my 20s? And I saw that the music had not, I couldn't allow it to be an inner bridge to a bridge to my inner self up until I was in my 50s. It just served as like an external noise factor that sometimes it activated my body to move, but beyond that, it wasn't really necessary to where I was focused, which was on thinking and paying attention and, to what my sensory body was telling me. I totally became more attached to music when I began to loosen up and want to feel freer. My relationship changed where I wanted to allow more life in. And before that, I was working so hard at being self-responsible and disciplined that music actually interfered with it. So, how was I related to music in that early part of my life? Well, I compartmentalized my relationship with it. In contrast to the early part of my life, I loved it and it made me feel alive and engaged. I have so many stories where I'd be at some outdoor conference or something, and the next thing I know, I was dancing, and the next thing I know, I was up on stage because there I was, this little 3-year-old bopping up and down and allowing it to move me somewhere. And of course, now it's everywhere in my life, and I work to relate to it in an uncontrolled way. And I play with it, right, to bring more and more into my life and to listen to music that I don't necessarily like, but that I allow to cause me to feel. I even picked up an instrument a few years ago, thanks to my BFF, and I played in a garage band for a while. 10 whole songs I can play. so this idea of how I'm connected to something or how I'm in relationship with it, it's designed to help us see our intention, our power, and our choices, because it's not by accident. However we're related to anything, it's not just by accident. It didn't just happen. There's a choice in it. There is something about you that's at work inside of it. So that's the thing about this. How am I connected? Or how am I in relationship? You are so darn fascinating. You are so complex. There's so much to understand about you. Of course, you'd want to start looking at these littler pieces, because then you get to see all the choices that you're making, both consciously and unconsciously. Okay, we're going to the next step when you get back after break.
The best of holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Okay, we're back. I am Sam Parrotto, and you're listening to Expedition Self. Well, we're talking about this idea of how do you connect, or how do you be in relationship with others. And I don't know, for all of a sudden today, you know that at the break when they have the commercials and it says, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile. See, I didn't even get it right. Anyway, every time I do a break and I listen to that, I just kind of float off thinking about my shoes walking around. So, okay, we're back. I'm back. All right. The next thing I want you to notice about being in relationship with something, remember we just talked about distance, is whether or not, or the degree to which you have affection or disdain. Is it positive or negative? Like, how does your heart feel about it? So in the political example, as Chris pointed out, clearly I have disdain for it, a very negative relationship, and a detached one, because I've never wanted to be involved in anything political. Now, I had a friend who ran for office a couple of times, And because I love her, I opened my heart to the political world as she talked about her experience. So that did add some dimension to my quality of relationship. But I'm judgmental about it. And right, so I have a closed heart. And I don't feel overly thankful to the political scene. And, that's something I try to bring more attention to too. Because there are these people who are spending their time making my life better because they're more related politically, right? So I can form a connection that's not all on the negative side through knowing that. You see, it's so important that you notice your quality of relationship, because from there you can decide to bring more presence of self to it. You can learn how to appreciate the world, even if it is not something you care to do. So we have so far worked with this idea of, am I in relationship at all? What is the distance at play between you and that thing? This includes the depth with which you relate to it, not just the times when you think about it or that you have a warm feeling about it, right? Keep remembering distance goes down and across. So has a lot to do with how deep you get with it. So when we want to notice this level of affection or disdain, the liking or the not liking, or the positive or negative sense of it, this will cause you to question why this is what it is. What has happened that caused you to form this place to relate from? Well, I'm hoping you're hearing the word. It's your history. It's your history. What information have you collected that causes you to feel the way you do? So I'd like to tell you about my relationship with bugs. A long time ago, I think I was probably 8 years old, I found a pincher bug in my shoe, and it was pinching me. Another time that I remember, I was playing in the grass and some very big red ants crawled on my leg and bit me. And I grew up around water, so there were always mosquitoes and flies and gnats and bees and horse flies and flying tarantula wasps. Okay, if you don't, those are real things, you can look them up. One time I was sitting on the beach, I was basking in the sun with my grandmother. We were in Catalina off the coast of California, and this bee decided that my jugular would be a good spot to have lunch. Ouch! And I reached up and I picked the bee off my neck after it stung me. I looked at it and I'm like, what are you doing? So this is a big thing about how I'm in relationship. I try to be as distant with bugs as possible. Like, I structure my life around avoiding bugs. I do have bug spray, but I don't roll around in the grass. I'm not as outdoorsy as I used to be. I felt at risk all the time of being bit or crawled upon. Sandy Brown used to tell me, oh, I calm my energy and then the bees crawl on my arm. I'm like, yeah, no. So, and then last year, as if I don't already have it, somehow or another, these moths got in my house. 1 year I've been battling these moths that have been wreaking havoc on my clothes. Bug revenge. So you can see I have a lot of history with bugs, and they have left me with less than a positive opinion of them. Yes, they have. So I am related to them. They are a part of my world and the lifestyle I want, but because I feel overpowered by them, smothered by them sometimes, I don't have any freedom here. And I'm less likely to want to see the value they bring to me or the world. So this brings me to my next point. As you look at how do I relate to this or that, you have a history that shapes your perspective, your understanding, and your openness to that thing. And this history limits you. It just does. So if you're going to work with being in relationship in life, then you have to go into it looking for the history behind it. And not, let me remind you, not to prove yourself right, but to understand it. Because when you understand it, it gives you the ability to make new choices. We pride ourselves so much on learning good lessons and being able to recognize how something should or shouldn't work, but we don't realize that it actually causes us to close the breadth of what we're willing to experience. Have you ever heard someone say, don't put three children together because one will always feel left out? Well, so again, how am I in relationship with that idea? This is that place of, am I in relationship with it at all? Like, do I even care about it or think about it? And then do I think it has value or I don't? So whatever we don't get awareness around, wherever we don't realize we're in relationship with something, this void will produce a lessened sense of aliveness. And we won't have the ability to impact it. It is just going to stay behind the scenes. You see, the thing about self-development work, depending on where you are in it, is that everything that you're going to discover in the next wave of your growth work, you don't now know what it is. You don't actually recognize fully what's wound up or bound up. Sure, you have the things you're not happy with or the things you want to cause that you know about, but true self-development that works with the unconscious, you don't know what's going to show up. So that's why the more awareness we can help ourselves with about this idea of not being in relationship or being in it, the more we're going to invite and welcome these new freedom places and choice places that come out of looking deeper. So being able to describe how you're in relationship with something or how you're connected to it, it works like an elevator into the self. Ding, 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 it goes down. And it reminds the self each and every time you spend energy here. It reminds you that you are one with all things, whether you recognize it or not. And of course, lastly, it gives you a way to go in and begin to clean it up. So what do I mean by cleaning something up? Well, it means you get to go and examine the beliefs that are limiting about it, like my idea that all political conversations are boring or superficial or unproductive. It means that if you look at how you're related to money, then you can notice places where you don't feel deserving, or historical experiences that reinforced why money made people greedy and unkind, and it's kind of evil, or the idea that there's not enough of it. See, this being in relationship conversation, it gives you the ability to stop seeing the world as so black and white, that something is or isn't, and you don't have any power over it, because it actually helps you find the place where you have the power with everything in your thinking, in your feelings, in your human being self. This power is what we're all seeking. And it does affect your life. It does influence how things go. So just by starting to communicate through the in relationship languaging that I'm going on and on and on about in this hour, you operate at a different plane. And that different plane then puts you in a more powerful association with the things that matter in your life, the stuff of your world, of your day, of the people in it as well. So it's really everything. Food, the weather, your feet, your car, your favorite boots, your job, the cleaning up of your closet, the roof on your house, the people who you watch on TV, the workers in the middle of the street fixing the water line, the concert you just attended. The list goes on and on. And it includes all the people in your life as well. And it includes all the parts of yourself, because you are in relationship with everything, whether you recognize it or not. These things of life are not just obstacles for you to deal with or avoid or move. They are part of your total experience. And the more you connect and make them yours and include them and own them and want to learn about them, the more empowered you'll be. So by tackling these blind spots of our existence, these places where we don't see what we don't see. Being able to be in relationship with even the blind spots, it helps you to begin to connect differently. So this reframing, the big part of it is to look for why it has value to you and to others and to the world. When I talked about how to clean it up, see, for most of us, we just accept the things of life and we decide our opinions are all there is, and it's where it stops. But if we're going to use this new level of self-connection, this one about relationship, the one that happens through, right? How am I related? Then a big part of that is a willingness to see everything. I mean, everything as having some value, as being essential in some way, as pushing into your space because it's going to expand you in some way. When we realize we are related to all things, we have a connection to them, then we become a more essential part of the world ourselves. And then we bring this heart open kind of approach because we see ourselves as learners, as students, as so important, as the source of what runs our lives. And we see ourselves as responsible for it. That's right. We are responsible for how we're in relationship with all things. We choose, we pick, we claim it, we decide. And by looking at our thoughts and our feelings in detail, we'll notice that when we hold something as less valuable or less important, a lot of times it doesn't go as well. Think my moths. I don't know where they came from. But when you think that something is useless, it usually shows up as useless or it's very loud, because by ignoring it, oftentimes it gets bigger. Have you ever heard that the more you resist, the more it persists? You know, I think there's a lot of connections you can make here about this idea of when you think something is useless, it usually shows up that way. We have to start to hold things as valuable, important, contributory, right? Abundant. And I know this sounds probably pretty abstract, but truly, try ignoring the old food in your refrigerator. Or watch what happens when you try to avoid working with that person you don't like, and how long that lasts, or how it deteriorates. Or notice when you think that a conversation is a waste of time and how that plays out. The big lesson with thinking about how do I connect with water is to notice that water is a very real, legitimate, valid, true thing on this planet. And so are you. And so are you. And the minute you go there, you get to use it as an opportunity to drop inside and look at how you are related on all these levels, to notice the distance, to connect with your history, to see where your thoughts are limiting, and to recognize your disassociation to the degree that it exists. And then you have more power. And then you get to do something that's so important. You get to stop taking it all for granted because you look for the value that it brings. You look for the reasons it exists. You attempt to understand why it's in your life or playing a role. You become less oppositional because you're looking for how it's related rather than how you're separate. And when we stop taking the things of our life for granted, we stop taking ourselves and our own journey for granted. And this is such a huge win. So it's huge. So this is how I'm connected and how being connected, right, is useful in so many ways. It helps you to start think about life from a non-doing action perspective and move you towards an experiential one. It helps you to look at how you occupy the feet you walk in and the place you stand and the thoughts you have. And then you're able to see and understand more about how you are you and how you relate to every single sliver and slice and bit of life. And this gives you more power. And you begin to place value on things you would normally miss or avoid. And then you are more aware and more conscious. And then you take things less for granted. And you're able to live in a world that's less about blocks and walls and obstacles and hard edges. And instead, to embody a world that's all about relationship from every angle. I have a quote that I think I can get in before I'm done today. It's from Martin Luther King Jr. He says, "It really boils down to this. that all life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one destiny affects all indirectly. I love that quote, and I so appreciate that you're with me each week. I hope you liked today's show. I hope you will leave thinking about being in relationship. And I have one last quote, which I think I can squeeze in. It's from Susan Sontag. Do stuff. Be clenched, curious, not waiting for inspiration's shove or society's kiss on your forehead. Pay attention. It's all about paying attention. Attention is vitality. It connects you with others. It makes you eager. Stay eager. All right. Have an awesome week. Thank you.